From 1857 to 1916, Harper's Weekly was an extremely important magazine in the United States, and it typically covered mostly political things. But during the American Civil War, it covered in detail many of the things that were going on around the country in that time period. This magazine usually had articles in it which depicted something political, and those political articles were sketched by Thomas Nast for the most part. The brothers John, Joseph, Fletcher, and James were the ones that came up with the concept for the magazine, and they created this magazine in 1857. One of the more famous sketch artists featured in this magazine was Alfred Wilde. Pictured here in this photograph, he's sitting in Gettysburg and he's sketching the Gettysburg battlefield. And many of his drawings were actually featured in the magazine itself. Perhaps the most famous cover of this magazine was the cover featuring Abraham Lincoln in 1860. This is shortly after Abraham Lincoln becomes president. Prior to this, the Harpers brothers were actually for the opponent of Abraham Lincoln. But eventually, they warmed up to the idea of Abraham Lincoln, and they were always pro-Union. A lot of the depictions in the magazine were based in satire, political satire, as you can tell by this depiction here with General Grant. Harper's Weekly was eventually called the President Maker, and editors like George Harvey ensured that that was the case. He was for President Woodrow Wilson and would always place for President Woodrow Wilson on the covers of his magazine. Eventually, all good things must come to an end. Harper's Weekly in 1916 would be merged with the Independent, and then eventually the Outlook, and then eventually in the 1970s would be called Harper's Magazine. It's not often that I get to share some of my collection, but I have a big collection of paper articles, especially articles that relate to the American Civil War. And inside this cardboard packet here, we have ourselves a Harper's Weekly. Now, there's no real special thing about this date, July 16th, 1887. And if you look at all the artistry that's on the cover of this Harper's Weekly, it's more about something fun than anything else, really. But what caught my eye about this particular one when I picked it up, and I was lucky to have picked it up, is the center cover art. Now, Harper's Weekly was known for having a center page. It was a nice large picture or drawing of sorts. In this particular Harper's, we have Gettysburg. A soldier has come back in 1887 to tell his story right in front of where the Cadore farm was. And that's what this depicts. You see what looks like maybe a Confederate soldier there, or it could also be a Union soldier with a gray jacket. A bunch of very old veterans here. And they're supposed to be, according to the article, the children of those veterans and grandchildren are out here with them. And you can see farm buildings off in the background here. You can see a very famous statue with the soldier aiming and firing in that direction that's up on a rock. And this soldier here is missing his arm. And that might have been, I'm not 100% certain, but that might have been a Medal of Honor that was given to this soldier that's pinned upon his chest. The artwork and detail in these magazines were just, bar none, outstanding. And the magazine talks about, in 1887, Gettysburg, which was only a quarter of a century away from this picture, the fields were in the same condition, much of the same condition that they were during the battle itself. It spoke of the stone wall and the fences and the fields off in the distance here and the fighting that took place here during Pickett's charge. And in this particular time, the belle of the ball was Mrs. Pickett herself. She came to Gettysburg to tell her story, and she was the talk of the town here in this paper, which only focuses on a portion of the battle, and it only focuses on this particular photograph or drawing, this rendering. But it's just amazing the detail that you see here from 1887, from the dress to the type of equipment that's being held in their hands, and the hats that are on their heads is pretty amazing stuff. I just can't get over seeing all of this. So if you see a Harper's Weekly laying around in an old antique store, and it's an entire paper like this one, do yourself a favor and pick up that piece of history, because you never know just exactly what you're going to find inside these papers.